All right, folks, we're going to move into Unit 2 now, and this will be our first chapter where we're actually going to be doing some coding. I am going to be following the PowerPoint here as both a guide to talk about the code that we're going to learn. And also, I am going to be using coding tools. And when I get to the point where I'm actually going to start using them, I will kind of coach you guys through it. We had as kind of a general recommendation that probably the best tool to use, at least at this point, the consensus of most of us web people here at Gateway, is to use Visual Studio Code to do this level of coding. I will make some special notes and mentions of other products that we can use. Right now is not really the time for that, but remember, you're not obligated to use the tools that I'm recommending. You can use whatever tools you want as long as you can get the work done. Ultimately, all you really truly need to create a web page, by the way, is a text editor and then a browser to look at your work. That's really all it takes. And a text editor is one of the most primitive tools that we have, right? The interesting thing is when we start using a coding tool, it really is that primitive tool with a bunch of bells and whistles, right, added to it. All right. Once again, I'm going to access the PowerPoint here from the author. Once again, as my guide. Don't worry, I'm not going to do nothing but PowerPoint here because it is going to be intermingled with coding. We start with a little bit of lecture stuff, and you'll see that as we kind of roll here. So we're moving into chapter 2. There's a lot of learning objectives in this chapter, so we'll look at where the stuff comes from. We'll talk about that HTML, XHTML, HTML5 thing again a little bit, and then we're going to start how do you see markup on a web page? We'll start looking at some tags, a lot of them actually, and then more tags, and then more tags, and then more tags, right? And then we'll also talk about how to look at your web pages, upload them, and then how do you make sure your code is accurate? And there's actually tools out there that help you do that. So we're going to go through all of that in this chapter. So a lot to learn. Real frankly, we still have plenty of time left here this evening, but I don't anticipate getting through all of this tonight. We might come close, but I don't anticipate we'll get through all of it. And that's okay, right? Because if you look at the due dates for the Unit 2 stuff, it's still a ways out. That is by intent, because some of this first stuff that we do here, the first steps we take, are sometimes the most challenging. And I'll use the analogy of driving like a manual transmission car. Like the first time you try to go in a manual transmission car, you're not quite sure about the clutch and all that. But then once you get the feel of it, it's like not a big deal, right? And that's kind of what this will feel like. All right, so we're going to go back to this talk about HTML, and we're going to say what the heck is it? All right, so basically it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And it's basically, as it says here, a bunch of little symbolic tools that we use, or tags that you put inside basically a text file that describes to the web browser how to display the content. The rules that we're following are the rules for HTML5 in this class. And it...
Sir, you weren't sharing your screen.
Oh yeah, thanks for sharing that. All right, sorry about that. Makes for a great start to the video. All right, you know what, you guys mind if I start over?
Yeah, no, you're good.
You know what, actually I'm gonna roll with it. I'm okay with it. I'll just have like a big old face on the screen on YouTube. I just hate that. But hey, it is what it is. I am what I am. What else can I really say? But here we are in chapter 2. Here are the learning outcomes for chapter 2. So for those people watching, these are the topics we're covering during this session. Like I said, I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, but we will try. But we start with what is HTML. Thank you for letting me know that I wasn't sharing my screen. I appreciate it. I wish you would have done it about a minute earlier, though. So at least you're getting a kick out of it. All right. So the rules that we follow for the tags that we will create were developed by the W3C, the same people at W3 Schools. And once again, if you want to learn about what is accurate, you go to their website. Now, I wouldn't go to this one. This is where the rules are described. But if you go to W3 Schools, that's where you can see samples of all the code and how to do it correctly, right? And that's the part that's more important for you. We will visit that site many times. Now is not the moment for it. All right. So when we start to use, there's terminology that they threw out there, and I'm going to be real frank. I don't often use the correct terminology. I try to, but sometimes you kind of revert to lazy habits. But basically, when we apply HTML and we put what we call brackets around stuff, so these are angle brackets. You'll find these on the shift of the comma and the period key on your keyboard, right? That's a left bracket, that's a right bracket. Then you put stuff inside those brackets and it becomes a tag. Tags have an opener and a closer, right? And the stuff that goes in between, once we have identified the tag, that's called an element. So, for example, one element would be a paragraph. And a paragraph is an element of a page, right? And that directly relates to the print world as well. So it's like we use the same terminology that we do often for printed documents, because that's where the ideas come from. All right. So, and notice here it says each element has a purpose, and most elements are coded as a pair of tags, an opening and a closing tag. And then you'll get, I know it's kind of weird to type those because usually you're used to the comma and the period, but when you're typing it on the keyboard, you do get into a flow where it becomes kind of normal, right? The version of HTML that we're learning is HTML5. That's the current official standard that's out there. Notice here they say the newest version of HTML, XHTML. So what the first thing I'll tell you is that anything that you do in XHTML, which really, I mean, it's not a dead language, it's still out there, works perfectly fine with HTML5. It's not, intended to go the other direction though. So in other words, what they're saying is if you have old web pages and you change what we call the doc type, which indicates what version we're using, to HTML5, old web pages will work within it just fine. That was part of the design. That was not true with XHTML though. XHTML had very strict rules, and if you didn't follow those rules, things would break. HTML5 allows for that, but it is also backwards compatible. But here's a very interesting little tidbit. XHTML is not dead. In fact, when you build really high-end web applications, XHTML is required because of its strictness and its adherence to the rules, right? So it's still out there, and we still code for it. What is different about HTML5? Well, they added a bunch of stuff to it that's brand new. They also added, basically tags that are brand new that we didn't see before. Like, for example, in the old days, if we wanted to add a video to a web page, it was really, you had to have the plugin, then you had to use an object tag and an embed tag and all this stuff. And if you didn't do it right, it wouldn't work. In HTML5, we just have a tag called video. When you drop your video link in there, you're rolling. It's just that simple. Now, the other thing that HTML5 brings to the table is all this behind the scenes functionality. Some of it you'll learn like when you get to the advanced web programming class, things like where we have like high-end JavaScript functionality, web sockets, web storage, the web API, all these like weird things that are attached to the back end. That, once again, that's level 2 kind of stuff, not in this course. When we start to build a web page, one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to look at this, and this is going to be the very, very first line in your document, and it's called the doc type. And technically, it's a document type definition. And what this line of code will do is when the browser first sees your web page and reads it, this should be on the first line, and it says, "Hey, browser, I'm doing HTML5. Please follow that rule set." If you don't include the doc type, what will happen is you will go into what we call quirks mode, which means that the browser will decide on its own what it wants to do. And it may or may not do what you want, which is not a good scenario when you want a web page to look very particular, right? So this is really critical. So what does this do? This sets up the structure of the rule set we're going to follow for the web page. And it is very important. The beautiful thing about the HTML5 doc type is it's very, very simple, unlike the old ones that we used to use. And I'll give you an example. I'm just going to go out to the web here, and I'm going to type HTML4 DTD, and then when you go in there, in the old days when we did HTML4 and we wanted to follow the rules, this is what we would have to type at the top of the document. Now, I don't know if you guys are noticing, this is not so user friendly, right? And you would never remember it. None of us never would. We would just have a copy of it somewhere and we'd create a new document and drop it in. Or if we were doing, let's see here, the XHTML DTD, and you look at that one's even more cryptic, right? And in fact, it would, I'm not even seeing a clean version of it here, but it basically, it could be as extensive as this, but really it would be a combination of the namespace and then this little tidbit here, which would designate. It's like, once again, you'd never remember it. You'd have to have a copy and paste it in. When they came up with HTML5, they're like, you know what? First rule, let's get rid of all that stuff because that's really messy. And so the HTML5 version is beautiful. It's just doc type HTML. And literally what it does is it tells the browser, you're following that rule set. You know where it is. It's on the W3C website. Go follow that. And then that's what we're following. And then the page will build correctly. Right. Now I'm tempted to go into the coding mode here. So we're going to, but before we get started, there's a couple little pieces that we have to do, right? Because I want to type this into a document like now, right? However, we have to do file management before we start coding, right? And this is maybe not like how you're used to working, but this is my strong recommendation for how to work. So you don't fire up your editor and then go, where am I going to save it? Instead, we're going to set up where we're saving it first, and then we're going to attach that editor basically to those folders, and then all the work will go in those folders. So we start with file management. So I'm going to go to my file system here, and you remember we did that file management exercise, you guys, right? And wherever you've decided to store your stuff, that's where you should be putting your work, right? So that's on you to decide where that location is. It could be in your documents folder, it could be on your Google Drive, it could be wherever, but that's on you to figure out. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to attach myself to kind of a weird place in my file structure. This is my norm for how I work, right? So I have a folder on my system, and this is my layout's a little more complex than yours, so you don't have to follow this kind of approach. But I have a folder for Prometheus, for all my accounts on Prometheus, and now I have to decide which one of these utility accounts am I using. I'm going to use the C account, and then I'm going to come up with a folder name that's unique to this semester because I do this every semester. Right? So this is my work paradigm. It might not be yours, right? You already have a folder you created called web programming and unit 1, 2, 3, and all that, remember, right? So that's probably where you want to put your stuff. But you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. I'm going to call it web prog FA 24 for fall semester 2024. That's my naming convention. I want you to notice a couple things in what I did there, though. This is kind of interesting. And I'm going to strongly encourage you guys to follow the same format. All the letters in that folder name are lowercase, right? And there's no spaces, no uppercase letters, no spaces. You got a question out there, Juan?
Yeah, I would just, out of curiosity, what's the purpose of that?
Well, okay. The purpose of it is to set a convention that you're following, so later on you're not guessing as to why stuff's not working. Okay. And there's a secondary reason. The secondary reason is on a Windows machine or a Mac machine, if I, mistakenly throw a capital W in there, let's say, for example, right? And then I go to my browser and type it in, but I type it lowercase, but actually on my file system, it's uppercase, and I'm connecting to my local machine. The operating system doesn't care. It's like, oh, I got it. You meant this one. And it takes you there. Yeah, that works fine on a local machine. So in other words, it's willing, your local operating system's allowing you to make mistakes, But when I move that file up to Prometheus, and it doesn't work like that. Web servers are exactly precise. If it's a capital letter, you better type a capital letter in. If it's lowercase, you better type lowercase. If it's space, you better type %20. You catching that? So that's one reason you're not going to remember to do that. Don't put spaces in, and don't put upper and lowercase letters in for static HTML pages. It's a convention that web developers follow. And I would also suggest that all the files that go in the folders and all the folders that go in the folders are also named the same way. When you switch to other technologies, and I'll just give you an example. If you switch to like .NET, or maybe you're using PHP or Java to drive a page, then you throw those capital letters in, because that becomes kind of a convention in those languages. Yeah. And it also helps you to identify that it's dynamic rather than static, right? These are just conventions. You don't have to follow those rules. If you want to put uppercase letters in, great, but you better remember to link it up correctly so it works on the server. That's kind of the point. But thank you for asking the question, because it really is a pertinent question. Now you can see I'm going into the folder, and I'm about to work on Unit 2. So I'm going to go ahead and create a Unit 2 folder inside this folder. Right? I didn't create any code for Unit 1, so I don't have a Unit 1. Notice once again, all lowercase, no spaces. I know this is my convention, so later on when I'm typing in my URL, I'm not guessing. I know exactly what it is, because that's my convention, right? You follow, and this is a standard convention, by the way. Now, inside of Unit 2, not like we're going folder happy here, but Unit 2 has 2 assignments. One is the basic HTML assignment, which in many cases will be the foundations, the beginning steps of your project. And then the other assignment is to do your Unit 2 case study. And that could be like, there's, I think, 4 different case studies in our book. There's Java Jam, Fish Creek, Pacific Trails, and Path of Light Yoga. Right? So 4 different websites that you can choose to build as you're working in this chapter. And then usually whatever case study you start with, you just use that one all the way through the book for the case studies, right? You can switch if you want, but whatever. But the coding you do for yourself, I think of it as the project. So what I'm going to do in my Unit 2 folders, I'm going to make 2 folders. The first one's going to be project. That's where I'm going to put it. I don't know what my project is named yet, but that's where it's going. Right? If I knew the name of it, okay, I'd put the name on the folder probably. Now, I also know I'm going to do a case study. I don't really know which one yet, but let's just say that you've picked one. Maybe you'll pick Pacific Trails, for example, or as many of my students do, they just choose Java Jam because it's the first one in the book. But you can do any of them. Please keep that in mind. Java Jam, Fish Creek, Pacific Trails, or Path of Light Yoga, I'm fine with it. Just pick one. If you change your mind later, you can change it later. Not a big deal. So now I have all the folders created where I'm going to put my work. Where we're going to be working is in the project folder while we go through this Unit 2 material. So I'm going in there, and then I don't know if you guys remember this little thing that we did last week with the file extensions. I'm going to kind of repeat that material a little bit. I'm using Windows 11, and in Windows 11, if I go to that little ... manager in the File Explorer and click on Options, go to tab number 2, which is the View tab, I want to make sure that this box here is not checked. It says Hide Extensions for Known File Types. Please uncheck that. If you happen to be on Windows 10, with Windows 10, the File Explorer has a ribbon bar, and on the View tab of the ribbon bar, there's a little checkbox, Hide Extensions. You just uncheck that, right? And that's a really important thing. And once again, I always say to my students, hey, you're trying to be an IT professional. IT professionals want to see their file extensions. Regular people, they don't need to because they don't care. It's not important to them. But to web developers, it's critically important, right? So now that I've got that feature set, I'm simply going to right click, and actually I'm not even going to create the file from here. I'm going to waffle on that. In the old days, I would normally create the file right here, but you know what? I'm going to do it just as an example. So why don't I just do a new text document, and I'm sorry for kind of bouncing back and forth with that, but I'm going to replace the entire file name, including the file extension. I'm just going to call it like sample.html, all lowercase once again. Yes, I know what I'm doing, so I'm going to change that file extension. You know, it's warning me, hey, do you know what you're doing? All right. But the point is, if your file extension viewability is set correctly, you should be able to see the .html at the end. If it's not, you'll just see like the word sample and the little icon that probably looks like a piece of paper instead of a web browser icon. All right. I'm actually going to delete this file, folks. So now I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio Code. We've kind of here in the web program have decided that that's kind of a good first editor for general purpose usage, and really can be used for most of your program, honestly. We did the install on this last time. If you didn't, I would encourage you to go back, watch those videos. But basically, we're using a product called Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. You can just simply Google it. I'm going to go into my start menu here and just start typing Visual Studio Code, which is different than Visual Studio, by the way. So I'm clicking on Visual Studio Code, and the interface is going to load up on my screen. And you can see when it comes up, it often does this. It gives you like update information, which I'm just going to click and take away. I have an old Java program that's loaded in here. I'm going to close that also. Sure, we'll save it. And then I have my old index.html file. I'm closing that too. So basically, I am closing all the stuff that was open on purpose. I don't want anything open in there for right now. I'm also going to switch myself to full screen mode. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm, going to attach myself to the folders that we just created, so that when I create something new, it goes into the right folders automatically. Okay, so you can do this a couple different ways. One way is in this left sidebar here. You see how they have this like icon that looks like two pieces of paper stacked on top of each other. If you click that, it'll open up this panel, right? And for the most part, you guys should not have anything attached here. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'm going to open a folder, right? And now I'm going to locate that folder. Mine happens to be on my Google Drive, but it doesn't really matter where it's located. And if you remember, I know where I put my stuff. You need to know where you put your stuff. That's on you. You guys are catching that piece. The folders that you've pre-created are probably adequate. And there's my web programming fall 24. You have to remember, if I was just doing this once, I would just call it web programming or web prog or something like that. But since I do it many times, I have like all my versions from every class are in there. So there's my Unit 2 folder. And then, you know what? I think I'm going to attach to it right here. Now, the reason is that way I can access both my project and my case study all at the same time. So I'm going to select this folder, which is the Unit 2 folder. And then what you'll see in the sidebar here is that now both of those folders are visible. And then if I'm going to create a file inside the project folder, which is my goal, I'm going to click that project folder. You see how the arrow points down now, right? And then now that that's highlighted, I'm going to come up to the toolbar here and I can just click new file, or I can go to the file menu and do new file. Right? Any one of those approaches is fine, whatever works for you. My typical habit personally is I usually do it here. That's just me, right? You'll find a way that works for you. I know other people will come here and just right click. That works too. There's no right or wrong as long as it gets created. So let's go ahead and create a new file. And then you'll notice what happens here is it's waiting for me to name it. Okay, well, the default name, remember, for every homepage on the internet is index, all lowercase, .html, also all lowercase. Once you've got that typed in, press enter, and the file is open. You can see it up here in the tab. I'm going to close that welcome screen, and we are ready to code. Right, so Visual Studio Code is one of these tools that I call it kind of a switchblade, or like a Swiss Army knife of editors, because it can support just about any programming language or markup language. You notice like when I saved it and named it .html, that it put the little brackets in there. It knows it's HTML code is what it's telling us, right? And whenever we're going to type code in this interface, all the lines of code will be numbered. So for example, if I just start typing here, go to the next line, it adds line numbers as I'm typing. That's very handy because when you look for errors to validate your code, it's always go to line 55. You know, there's your error, you know, that kind of thing. So line numbers are very, very helpful. Now, you notice that I made a couple of changes inside the file here. And as I made changes, the little X in the tab changed to a circle. That tells me that the file is not yet saved. So if I do a Control S to save it, notice how it changes back to an X. So now it's saved. Start typing. Now it's a circle again. I had to Control S to save, right? So I have this habit when I'm doing coding like this, and I do it automatically. My brain doesn't even think about it. I do a bunch of stuff and I just go Control S, Control S, Control S. Why? Because I've had plenty of circumstances where I would type and forget to do Control S, and then like the battery would die on my laptop, and there goes my file. You know. Here's kind of a beautiful thing though, right? Typed all this stuff in. I didn't save it, right? Watch what happens. I'm going to close it. It didn't ask me to save it. Did you guys notice that? It's not like Microsoft Word says, hey, do you want to save your file? I just closed it. Now, if I go back to Visual Studio Code and launch it again and it comes up, I want you to check it out. It comes back up unsaved. Because this is one of the beautiful things about this product, right? And why I like it is because, hey, man, if I forgot to save my file, it's still saved. I don't know how it does it exactly, but it retains it. And it saves it in its unsaved state. That's kind of weird, but it works. So, you know, so if you accidentally close Visual Studio Code and you forgot to save, you don't have to freak out. Some programmer thought about this a lot. I'm like, I forgot to save. Damn it. You know, oh, wait, why don't we build in a feature that it just saves automatically, but even though it's not saved, you know, so take that for whatever it's worth. All right. But whenever I remember to say it, like if I'm saving it, I'll verbalize it, Control S to save. Right. Other ways to save, by the way, is you can just go up to the menu and click save. If you have a whole bunch of files you're working on, you can choose save all. Okay. So now that we're ready to code, let's do the doc type, the first line in every HTML document. So we start with pressing the shift key and the comma key so we get our left bracket. Now, notice this is an intelligent editor, right? And I hit a bracket. It knows I'm in an HTML file. It knows it's blank. So what does it suggest I type first?
Doc type.
The doc type, right? And now you can approach this two different ways. Some people say it builds character to type in every character, you know. That's kind of a pun on pun, but true. I mean, I learned the hard way. I like manually type it in. But if it's highlighting like this, all you have to do is press enter and it drops in the rest of it for you automatically. All right. So you can look at this two different ways. And here's the one way. Some instructors that I know, even not here at Gateway, but some instructors that I know would be like, well, you're just teaching them how to take shortcuts. I'm like, but what would you do professionally? Well, I would totally do that. Then why wouldn't you teach students to do it? You catch my drift on that, right? The tool's doing it. And this feels uncomfortable at first because the tool is auto completing your code. But the reality is this is how coders work these days. And it helps you because it makes sure that you're not making mistakes. See what I mean? So that's why it's valuable to do that. It created the opening bracket, the closing bracket, the exclamation and doc type. And that doesn't technically have to be all uppercase, but it is here. And then it declares the language. This is required in every HTML document. You have to have a doc type at the top. If you don't, it doesn't know what rules to follow, and what you thought looked great could totally break. Right? All right, so that's our doc type, folks. All right, back finally to the PowerPoint. There's our doc type. All right, so the other thing that they do is they start showing you like the basic structure of an HTML page and like what goes into it. So we're going to start like coding all this stuff. But what we see here on the page is kind of like the default minimum structure for a web page. And in truth, if I bring up a higher level product and I say create a new HTML5 web page, it'll throw all this code on the page automatically. Right. However, this editor doesn't quite work that way. So in that aspect, it's manual. But basically, what we're going to look at here is that HTML code is kind of broken into major segments, and there's two major segments of an HTML page, and then the tags that encapsulate it and break those portions into sections. The first section, and this is not text that I can click on. Oh, yes, it is. All right. First section is the head section, right? The second section is the body section, but both of those sections sit inside HTML tags. So I'm going to build from the outside in, right? I'm going to build the outer structure, and then we're working our way inwards. So back over to our editor, and then I'm going to go to the second line here, and then I'm going to do an opening bracket, and I'm going to start typing real slowly, by the way, HT, and I'm going to autofill it and then close the bracket. The moment I close the bracket, notice what it does. It creates for me the closing tag that matches that tag. So in other words, when I'm typing tags like this, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you guys can see this. Wait, a little too much. All right. So this tag is the opening tag, has its own opening and closing bracket, but the closing HTML tag has the same tag preceded by a /. So the part I have highlighted now is the closing tag for HTML. All of the contents of our web pages have to go inside those two tags. So in other words, I created the HTML tag. Now I'm going to split them to make room for all the other stuff, right? Then the document breaks into the two major sections. And now personally, I like to indent my code when I'm like encapsulating things. So I'm going to hit my tab key to go in one tab stop. I'm going to do opening bracket, and then I'm going to type head, closed bracket, and there's my closing head tag goes with it. A couple blank lines here. Actually, I think two blank lines is good. The other major section of the document is the body tag. So now I'm going to add body. There's my opening and closing for that. And then once again, I'm making a little bit of space here. I probably put too much space at the bottom, but whatever. So I'm just going to get rid of that. But those are the two main sections of a web page. Now, from a practical standpoint, this is kind of usually how I describe it to people when they're first learning it, is the stuff that you put in the head section basically is the non-visible parts of the page. The stuff's not visible inside the browser. The stuff that you put in between these two tags is the stuff you see in the browser window. So then what do you put up here? Well, you put your title, you put your JavaScript links, your CSS, your meta tags, and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? But generally stuff people are not seeing up here, and then stuff people are seeing down here. Now, if you flip back over to that PowerPoint, by the way, you'll notice that they have a couple little additions. So I'm going to kind of cover these one at a time. So first with the HTML tag, there's a language declaration, and I'm going to add it and then talk about it a little bit. So I'm putting a space inside the tag. I'm typing LANG, which indicates language, equals, and then double quotes, EN. What does that stand for? Surprise, surprise, English. If I don't include this, does it have a default? That should be your question. And yes, it defaults, guess to what? English. All right. Why this is relevant? This is actually more relevant when we do international web page work, because when the browser hits the page, it really is telling the browser, which language do you want me to load? Right. So I don't know if you've ever been to multilingual websites, you guys, but they're out there. Like if I visit a website in Mexico, the default language is going to come up Spanish. but they might have an English option, right? And so this designates the starting language for the page. So if you have a multilingual page, this allows you to designate which one comes first. It's considered good etiquette to include this. Is it absolutely necessary? I'm going to tell you from a practical standpoint, no, because it defaults to English anyhow. All right. Then we go to inside the head tag, and we're going to add a couple different things. The first thing that we're going to add is we're going to add a meta tag for the character set, and we're going to set this to UTF-8. And then we're going to close that tag. And meta tags, by the way, are what we call self-closing tag. There's no closing tag for a meta tag unless you're using XHTML, and in that case, you put a slash inside the thing like that. Not required for HTML5 though. So what is this about? This meta tag is a special kind of directive tag that provides auxiliary information to the browser. And in this case, it's telling you which basically alphabet font set electronically we're using. Here's what's interesting about UTF-8. UTF-8 is pretty much the universal standard for web pages, even internationally. Inside that character set, we have all the uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, symbols, mathematical signs, a bunch of goofy looking images and stuff. But we also have complete alphabet sets for Greek, all the like Latin letters with accents and, you know, backwards, forwards ones, and then umlauts and all that kind of stuff. And it also has the Cyrillic languages in it, and Hebrew and Arabic, and you know, a bunch. So many languages are already built into it, right? And so, generally speaking, UTF-8 will cover most of your web page needs, even for international web pages. Generally speaking, it's when you get to really weird ones where this changes. So this is, you know, in the old days, we'd never included this, but it became part of the standard. If you wanted your page to be valid and your browser to load it correctly, we include this now, right? Okay, here's the other thing that we always have to include. That's a title tag. And the title tag, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. This is the information that will go on the tab in the browser. So for example, this allows you to control, for example, what appears here in your tab. So this page that says XHTML 1.0 DTDs, that's the words that are inside the title tag on that web page. So you can control the words that appear in the tab of a page. And what I always recommend to people is the first couple of words should be the most important ones, right? You don't want like a sentence here, right? Because, you know, if you're like me and you load like 20 tabs in a browser or whatever, or 50, right? Those tabs get smaller and smaller and smaller. So if the first word's not saying it, they're going to miss the point. Right now, I'm just calling it my web page, but there you go. Right. The other thing that we're going to do is we want to like put this up on the screen and see what it looks like. And you know what? I'm going to go into the body section now, and I'm going to tab in, and I'm going to just start with something really basic. I'm going to do a heading level 1 tag, H1. And then inside that tag, I'm just going to say, whatever. Hey, whatever. That's all I got in my brain right now. Right. It's been a long day. Juan, did you have a question?
Yeah, mine's like my head on number 3 line, it's like red. Same with my number 5, the title's red.
Okay. You know what? Juan, would you be willing to share your screen?
Yeah.
Let me turn on the switch so you can do it. All right, go ahead and just hit the share button, and then choose like the whole screen, whichever screen you're looking at, and hit share. It'll automatically switch over. There you go. All right. So this is our first debugging exercise, you guys. No, seriously, right? And Juan, thank you for volunteering it. So Juan is already identifying a couple of issues here. And Juan, this is kind of a neat thing too, but I'm able to draw on your screen, right? So here's what Juan's noticing is the head tag is red and the title tag is red, and he noticed mine weren't. Here's what he's missing. Right here at the end of line 2, he forgot his closing bracket. So Juan, go ahead and type in a closing bracket there. I'll clear this stuff off the screen.
Oh.
All right. Now you see it's through in the closer again. You got to delete that because you already have that, right? And voila.
So head.
Wait, no, you fixed one, but not the other. You think that you might have a similar problem? Look at the line that precedes it, and bingo, you're missing a bracket there too. Oh. And this is great, Juan. Thank you for volunteering. I mean that sincerely, because these are the kind of things you're going to run into. You shouldn't be embarrassed and not speak up. Let's fix it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is another thing that we're learning now. Basically, is that you know, when we're coding like this, when we're using a quality tool like Visual Studio Code, it identifies where your errors are because it color codes it. It's going, hey, there's something wrong here, right? It caught your attention, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I can do the same thing. I can break my code too, and you can see it triggers it red, right? So, and then, yeah, I don't like that auto type sometimes, and that's an example of it right there. All right, so see if you can get your pages to this point. And then we'll talk about the heading tags, but I just want to put something in there for right now. And once you have this all typed in, go ahead and do Control S to save. All right. Now we're going to go back to our File Explorer. We're not going to load this to Prometheus yet. We're just going to look at it locally. And so I'm in my File Explorer, and I'm just going to double click this. I'm just going to go here, and there it is in my browser. Notice the tab has my title. And then if I right click anywhere on the blank part of the page and click View Page Source, I will see the exact code I typed in the editor. So it shows you the browser's receiving the code, taking your instructions, and rendering it to the screen the way you supposedly wanted it. Now, as you're coding, and I'm just going to kind of give you guys this example, and sometimes I'll do this as we are coding. I will often like split my screen, you know, and do this. So I'll code in one window, and then you can see the results, you know, in the other, right? And so if I change it to, hey, whatever, you know, dude, and save it, and then come back over here and refresh it, I see the update.
Sweet.
Yeah. And check it out. You know, if you have two screens, you can have your code on one screen and then your browser on the other. That's a recommended way to work too. Joshua, you have a question.
So I have all the code like how you have it, but nothing came up. Like it just was a blank and it doesn't have like a name.
All right. Well, Joshua, why don't you share your screen with us, and let's take a look and see what's going on.
Okay.
At the bottom of the Zoom window, just hit share and then choose the entire screen.
It should be
and
one.
Monica put in a very good little tip in the chat, you guys. And she said, if you right click index inside of Visual Studio Code and do a preview, right?
All right.
Okay,
I decided to minimize the Zoom call. So can you see it now?
I can see a blank web browser is what I see.
Yeah, see, this is what I have put in. Am I missing something?
Yeah. Can anybody tell what he's missing? It's not the code. Okay, Josh, I'll give you a tip. Look at your tab up at the top in Visual Studio Code. It's index.html. Notice it's a circle. It's not saved.
Oh, I thought I pressed Control S, and I guess it just...
And there you go. Now go back.
Okay, I guess it just didn't save. Okay.
Yeah, now go back to the browser and make sure it loads. There you go.
Okay, cool. Yep.
Right. Okay, so
Weird, 'cause I hit the
actually
control
a
S,
very
so I guess it
common
just didn't
mistake.
save the first
You
time.
didn't save it. Why can't I see anything? You didn't save it. Right.
Yeah, I thought I saved it the first time, but okay. Thanks.
All right, Matt.
Oh, my thing just accidentally raised.
Oh, okay.
I was messing with my lights to make my camera brighter.
Not
And I
a
must
problem. Right. I'm gonna take the screen back, you guys. All right, and we'll roll forward. And I think we're probably coming up on needing a break here pretty soon, but I'd like to do a couple more slides if you don't mind, and then we'll take a break. All right. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. So basically, we covered this slide, and then they start to explain some of the same stuff I just went through. So we have the two major sections of the page: the head section, non-visible part of the page. That's always what I tell people. Then the body section, which is the stuff you want people to see, right, on the page. The words, the videos, the images, all that stuff will go in the body, right? We talk about the title tag, and right, like they're doing it in a really basic text editor, right? The title element is what they call it because it's in between tags. And then the meta tag is a meta element, which is unique special directives for the browser. When you get to more advanced coding, there's a whole bunch of stuff you do with meta tags, and including like throwing in search keywords or designating what product generated the code or things like that. There's all these special things that you do with it. Generally, I wouldn't throw meta tags at you like in a first, coding lesson, but they're required, and the book shows it, and the standard of HTML5 requires it. When you actually get that page all saved, right? It's got to be saved and your code is accurate, and you go to your browser and you launch it, you should see the content of the page as you designed it and your title up in the tab of the browser, right? So you have control over all of those things. So at this point, we are going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and pick up on slide 12. So I'll see you guys. I'm going to pause the video, and we will resume in 5 minutes. I'll see you then. All right. All right, we're back from break, and we're going to continue here. And what we're going to move on to now that we've kind of got the basic structure in place is we're going to start talking about all the various tags. And we're going to experiment first with heading tags. Now, we already put one of these in. I did, right? If you guys copied me, fantastic. But basically, a heading is like what you think of it, right? So like when you're creating a document, or if you're looking at like a newspaper or a magazine, that's kind of the title basically is the heading. And sometimes we have various levels of headings. So like HTML has 6 levels of heading tags built in. Now, from a practical standpoint, and I always tell this to my students, they have 6 levels built in. Whenever I'm coding my pages, especially by hand, I rarely go past level 3, just real frankly. H1, H2 I use all the time. H3 once in a while. I never hit H4, H5. And part of it is because when it gets to that size, I'm like, I'm not sure I really need it, right? I'll do it a different way. That's kind of my thinking. Juan, question.
Your screen share again.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Oh, I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know.
Here's the magic. Yeah, no, you're right, though. I got to remember that when I take a break to like turn it back on. But here we go with the heading tags and what they look like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to experiment with the first 3 levels and show you what it looks like. So I'm just going to kind of put that on the page. Now, I will tell you that as I'm starting to build this, I was telling my students, it's so much easier to build a web page when you have a theme in mind for what you're building. And I haven't decided what my theme is yet. So I might be thinking about it here as I'm kind of going. So right now it's the hey whatever page, right? So I'm going to put in a heading level 2, and then I'm going to go hey whatever dude, and let's just do a what's up for my second header, and then my level 3 heading. You see I forgot the opening bracket there. I'm just going to say not much. Right. Now I've made the changes to the document. Control S to save. Back over to the browser and hit refresh. And now you can see the results. Right. So you can see how the size diminishes. And this is really kind of hard to pick up right now, but these also have spacing around them. There's a little bit of space above and below each one of these, and they're all bold on top of it. So the thinking is if you're putting a heading on a page, you want it to be bigger and bolder than the regular text. Well, what does regular text look like in an HTML document? And I'm going to say typically regular text goes inside the paragraph element or paragraph tag, right? So like regular words you're going to put on the page. So I'm going to create one of those. I'm going to create a P tag, and I'm going to say this is a paragraph with just plain old regular words and stuff in it. And you guys noticing how it's going off the side of the screen?
Yeah.
It's like, why isn't it doing what Microsoft Word does and move it to the next line automatically? Because that's not how coding editors work, by the way. If you want that to happen, what you have to do is you have to go to your menu, go to the view menu, and then choose this option, word wrap, and then it will wrap it automatically. But I do want you to notice really carefully that even though it's wrapping, it's all still technically on line 12. Browsers and editors don't care how long the line is. The computer can read it just fine. We're the ones with the problem, you see, right? So we turn on word wrap so that we don't have to, like, what are those words? You're not scrolling to the right or to the left, kind of bites. But recognize the fact that it's still all in one line, right? All right, so because this is kind of a short paragraph and I don't know what else to type, I'm just going to take these words for right now and copy them and paste them in a few more times. So I'm going to go like that. There's a paragraph. Notice how all those words are encapsulated. There's more terminology for you inside the opening paragraph tag and the closing one, right? Control S to save. Back over to the browser and refresh, and there's my paragraph. So now you can see the difference in between the size of the headings and what we consider normal paragraph text. Okay. And hopefully that's working for you guys. You all good? Trying it?
Yeah.
All right, I'm assuming you guys are good. I'm going to hop back over here, and now we're going to learn a little bit about this. But you know what? I'm really kind of feeling like I'm flying without a wire, and I'm real frankly, I don't like it. Right. So I usually try to pick a theme for the semester, and very often, it's football season. I do a Green Bay Packers page, but I've done that so many times, right? I don't want to do that again. So I'm looking for inspiration here. Sometimes I pick like whatever like new TV shows out there that I really am like digging and watching, and I'm really struggling to think of something. House of the Dragon has already come and gone for the summer, right? I've already done that as a theme. Sometimes I do I like to play guitar, and I make a guitar page. So you guys might go through the same process. So like if you're wondering what was that personal project assignment all about, like picking a theme or a topic, well, if I have a theme or a topic, then I have content I can draw from. I mean, that's really kind of what it is. And I'm just trying to think of what would be a really good maybe TV show that I could build on that I'm into. Like, what am I watching these days? There's not a lot of good TV out there right now, I think. How about this? When I said
about the Lions.
The Lions.
Yeah.
I love it though, Juan. Yeah. You know what? Yeah, that's not happening. All right. But how about this? I've been I sit in the kitchen and I cook sometimes. I fire up the iPad and I hit Hulu or Netflix or something. And lately I've been watching The Curse of Oak Island. Do you guys ever watch that? That's like a guilty pleasure of mine, right? Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah,
that's
all
going
the
to be,
time.
I'll tell you what, that's going to be my theme for the semester. That's what I'm going to build, right? Because I'm highly enthralled and enthusiastic about that show. I think it's really cool. All right, so I'm going to come back into my webpage here for a moment, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my title. And I'm going to call it The Curse of Oak Island. Right, and you know what? The main heading on my page, I think I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to call it The Curse of Oak Island. And then I'm in my second level header here. I'm going to say Oak Island, Nova Scotia, Canada. Yeah, not too far from the Trailer Park Boys, by the way. I don't know if you guys are, that would be a funny one to do on too, but I that one's a little more risque, so we'll go with this one. It's a little safer. And so this is just tiny little island off of the Nova Scotia province of Canada that supposedly has buried treasure from long ago, and some people think it might be from like before Europeans even arrived here. But it's kind of a goofy show, but it's also really cool and historically interesting, I think, right? And I'm not sure what to put as a tagline here. Maybe something goofy. You know what? I'm going to say still thinking of a tagline. I'll come up with something and I'll put it in there. I'll find like a quote from the show or something. Right. And then instead of having like this nonsense paragraph, all right, you know what? I need some inspiration here. Here's my inspiration. I'm going to bring up my web browser and I'm going to Google it. I'm going to type The Curse of Oak Island. Right. And then, well, I could go to their webpage, but instead of going to their webpage, I'm going to go to Wikipedia. Right. And of course, there's a Wikipedia page on it. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy some of the text from here. I'm not going to grab that weird little number there, but that's going to kind of follow me anyhow. So I'm just going to copy this text and then I'm going to put that inside of my paragraph. So now if you guys have a theme that you picked, and let's say you want to build a page about this video game or your hobby or a restaurant or whatever it happens to be, that's why it's important to have a theme, because then you can draw from that content. And so that way I'm not making up the words. These are actual words about this. And, it comes from Wikipedia. We can make note of that later. But let's just save this and make sure it's working. So I'm doing a Control S. I'm going to come back over to the browser here where I still have it loaded. I'm going to refresh. Now watch, the tab changed name because I changed the title. My headings all changed and my text changed. Yes, Juan.
This may be off topic. It's something we're going to learn down the line, but the web page changed up top, but the domain, I noticed it's like, does coding, are you able to make a domain name in coding?
No.
Okay.
No, that's controlled by the server you're connecting to now. But that's a really good question, because right now we're not connecting to a server.
Yeah.
We're working on our local file system, and that's the URL the browser is using to get to it. And in fact, how do I know it's on the local file system? It says right here, it says file.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, it starts with the G drive, but if yours is pointing to a C drive, that's not really out on the internet. That's on your machine.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
Can I control that URL? No. The only part of it I can control is this stuff where I name the folders. Right. Mm-hmm. So you see, like, basically that's the folder I made. And then I made a unit 2 and a project and an index. That's the part I can control.
Perfect.
But I don't have a domain name to attach to.
Yeah.
When I move it to Prometheus, though, it'll be prometheus.gtc.edu /squiggle your account name folder page.
Okay.
Like that, right?
Perfect.
So now if you have an actual domain name and you have actual web hosting, then it could be like Juan Alejos, project index, right? It would be like that.
Yeah, perfect.
Right. So if that makes sense. All right. So I got some information in there. It's not very pretty, but the stuff's on the page, right? And you know what? One paragraph is pretty darn boring. So let's go back over to our friend Wikipedia here, and let's just grab a little bit more content that we can throw in here. So I'm going to add another paragraph tag. And I'm doing this so I have content to work with, folks, right? And I'm going to paste that in. I'm getting rid of these weird square bracketed numbers in here because it's not really needed. This is me being a little bit overly concerned, but it's not really that much of a concern. Now I'm going to do a save. And then once again, back over to the browser. And then if you want a shortcut key for refresh, instead of like clicking up here, you can right click and reload, or you can do a Control R to reload the page. Okay, that's also, but you'll notice, I mean, this isn't very fancy yet, but we are getting this stuff published. And notice, I want you to notice a couple little things, right? So we noticed already the headings are of a decreasing size, right? They're bold and there's space around them. Also notice the paragraphs are what we consider like normal text. So this is our normal text size. And notice that the paragraphs also have a little bit of space above and below them, right? That happens automatically with the tag. So it's telling you is the tag has a little bit of styling built in to make it look better. When we learn CSS, by the way, we'll be able to override those settings and put in our own look and feel. We can control the fonts, the colors, the spacing. Oh my God, we can do so much. Actually, it's kind of insane, right? It's just your imagination that limits you ultimately. All right, so now we have two paragraphs and we jump back over to the PowerPoint here. And the next thing that they're going to introduce to us is a standalone tag called the line break element. This is kind of weird, right? And this is why I was having to look at the spacing. When we were looking at the spacing in the browser, and here, let's go back to the split screen thing. That looks good. You notice that this paragraph automatically has a little space in between it, right? And I didn't tell it to do that. I didn't like create space here to create that space. The paragraph tag does it automatically. A little space before and a little space after. But now that I've manually added space in between, I'm going to do Control S to save. I'm going to come back to the browser and refresh it and watch what happens. Nothing. Nothing happens. So here's a really important lesson about writing HTML. Just because I'm adding blank space inside my HTML document doesn't mean that it travels to the web page. You might go, oh, you know what? It didn't even make it to the web page. You might have that in the back of your head. I'm going to do a right-click view source and take a look. It sure did. It's just not rendering. Here's another little tip, right? If I'm inside a block of text, like for example, right here at the beginning of the paragraph, I say the curse, right? I'm going to put in a bunch of spaces. I'm going to save it. Watch the web page again. No change. I added a whole bunch of spaces here. Nothing happened. Did it make it to the page? It sure did. So why is that stuff not showing up? Okay, so this is the rule, right? The tags are controlling the spacing. So in between tags, if I create space, the browser ignores it. If I create spaces inside of text, it reads the first space only. Subsequent spaces will not render. So this creates kind of a little bit of a weird thing that your code can look different than what goes on the screen. But you can code around that to make the screen do what you want. So if I wanted to add spaces or blank lines, there's ways to do that. We're going to start with blank lines though. So I'm going to get rid of these spaces for right now. But let's say I was in the middle of this paragraph and I got to this point and I'm like, you know what? I want to put a couple of extra blank lines in here. I would add the BR tag, which is the line break tag, right? So I'll put in one to start with. come back over here to the browser and I will refresh. And we'll look where I put it, right after Nova Scotia. Refresh. So it put a line break in, but what did it do? It was kind of like if I had a word processor and I put my cursor here and pressed enter, it just moved it down to the next line. If I want to simulate the look of a paragraph, so in other words, I want it to go down 2 lines, maybe I can try that here. I can do 2 line breaks and save it, and then come over here and refresh. But it created it so it moved down 1 line and 1 more. And this is still the same paragraph. Kind of interesting, right? So you can use line breaks to control spacing within a paragraph if you wish. Or I could also, if I wanted to really like spread my paragraphs apart that far, I could put line breaks here. You know, so instead of actual blank lines, I have to tell it what to do, folks. That's kind of the point here. It's very literal. So if I come back now to the browser and refresh, now it's adding the space in. Right? So this is stuff you have to wrestle with as you're creating the content. The idea is that your backend code can be formatted any way you want because it's just a set of instructions. What ends up on there is what the instructions say, not how the backend code looks. Sometimes you make the backend code look in a way that looks comfortable for you. And then what pushes out to the browser is what's comfortable for the viewer of the website. So we're designing for the viewer. But at the same time, we have to look at the code. So if it helps you to do stuff here that makes your code easier to look at, you just do it. One example of that is the indenting. That indenting's not showing up here, is it? Right. So the white space, the blank spaces inside your HTML document are functionally ignored. You've got to tell it to move to the next line, and you have to tell it to add spaces. Kind of interesting. Right. All right. Let's move on. Right. The one thing that is kind of interesting about the line break tag, and I should probably augment this a little bit, is the line break, like the meta tag up here, does not have a closing element. But if you remember in XHTML, I said you can do this. You can add a slash like that. You can do the same thing with the line break tag. So in XHTML, they had this strict rule where everything had to be closed. So this is how we did line breaks inside XHTML. You know what? It works just fine in HTML5, by the way. So you can do it either way. But this is not necessary in HTML5, but it's still supported. Technically, what we call those are self-closing tags, by the way. Let's move on to the block quote. So the block quote is another tag that tends to try to simulate what we do in the publishing world. So like, all right. So when if I'm like writing a paper for a class, so, you know, just think about this, and you might have to do this for like English class or whatever. And you write a paper and then you include a quote like Donald Trump said, or, you know, Kamala Harris said, right? And then you put quotes around it and what they said, right? If it's a really short statement, like, you know, let's make America great again, right? You know, I'm just joking around here, right? I'm not like picking a candidate. I'm just saying, right? If it's a really short phrase, I can just put double quotes around it, leave it in the paragraph. But once that quote gets to be really long, so for example, you know, I could say like something like, I don't know, pick a musical artist, sang this song, and here's like 2 verses of it, and that's more than 4 lines long. You're in an academic document, what you're supposed to do is put it in as a separate paragraph, indent the margins in from both sides, and put quotes around it because it's more than 4 lines long. And that way people know it's not something you wrote, somebody else wrote or said, right? It's called a block quote. And so I'm going to basically do that example. So I'm going to, here at the bottom of this paragraph, I'm going to add a block quote tag. It's automatically closed. I'm going to make a little space in between. And then I'm just going to take one of these paragraphs and just repeat it, right? Or no, actually, let's get fresh content. Let's go. I mean, we got Wikipedia open, right? Let's go Yeah, let's grab this. And I'm going to put quotes around it also, and then paste the stuff in. And technically, because it's a quote, I might say like, Wikipedia, whatever. I'm being a little snarky here, but you're supposed to have a citation. So this is certainly more than 4 lines of text. I do want you to notice though, because I have word wrap turned on, right? It's really all on line 20. Here's another weird thing. I can also like break this apart like that. And because it's on a separate line number, it still reads as one item, by the way. And we'll experiment with that a little bit. So let's save that. Let's go back to the browser and do another refresh now. I'm going to widen the browser screen just a tad so you can see all the content. And now I'm going to do a Control R to refresh the browser. Make sure I'm clicking in there first. And notice how the block quote operates. It automatically indents from the left. Hard to tell on the right, but it's indenting on the right and the left. So that's a block quote. Okay, practical knowledge. How often do I include block quotes in my HTML pages? Rarely, real frankly, right? If I want to do that to a block of text, I use other mechanisms. But if you truly are doing a block quote, it's not a bad tool to use, because the other aspect of HTML is what we call the semantic meaning of the tags. And we'll talk more about that later, but that's a big change in HTML5 too, that the tags that you're using indicate what the content's supposed to be. So a heading is like the title. A paragraph is just some words. A block quote is a block quote. That's kind of the thing. So that's one reason to use it, by the way. All right, I'm going to go back to the coding engine here and back over to the PowerPoint. The next thing that we're going to learn are what we call phrase elements. And these are really, I like to think of them more as generally inline elements. And we haven't learned what inline and block level stuff is yet. But basically, these are tags that we add like inside paragraphs, typically. And so there's a couple of them that are kind of redundant here, and I'll talk about those. So the first two that I think are redundant are basically the bold and the strong. And I do want to, so that's the first one I'm going to demonstrate, and I'll demonstrate both. But basically, the bold tag is really simple. You use the letter B, you put a opening B and a closing B around something, and it makes it bold. Pretty simple, like using a word processor. When they did XHTML, they didn't like that tag. They got rid of it for XHTML, and they came up with this one saying strong, meaning if you're making something bold, it means it's important, or let's make it strong, And what's happened is when we went back to HTML5, they brought back the B tag, and now both of them are valid and basically used in the same context. So I'm going to demonstrate both. So let's go up to the first paragraph, and I'm going to bold the name of the show with a B tag. So I'm going to take the closing B tag now, and I'm going to move it. Now I could cut and paste, but you can also drag and drop, by the way. It's highlighted. So there's an example of it going bold. And then we have, let's see, the brothers here, and we'll put a strong tag around the brothers, Rick and Marty. Opening strong, closing strong, and we're going to move the closing strong to where we want it, which is after their last name. So opening strong, closing strong, saving it. Now we're going to look in the browser. So you're going to see, before I refresh, you're going to see this go bold, and then this will go bold, right? Watch the refresh, right? Functionally, they do the same thing. The bold tag is the HTML5 approach. I prefer it. It's only one letter. Strong is the XHTML approach. It does exactly the same thing. I go for the one that's shorter, typically. That's just me. If you're writing XHTML, though, you better use strong. So that's an example of strong. Another one on that list that has two possibilities are the italics and emphasized, right? Same story. This one was developed during XHTML. This is the old HTML4 one coming back in HTML5. both are kind of used interchangeably. So once again, I will highlight those. So we need to come up with let's do multi-season will be italic. And then we'll take the closing tag and move it. There we go. So it's wrapped around multi-season. And then let's put an M or EM tag around legendary treasure. Sounds pretty good. Right. So just move that over there. Right. So multi-season and legendary treasure. Control S to save. Clicked back into the browser. Now I'm going to do Control R to refresh. And now you can see it. Multi-season and legendary treasure. Pretty nifty. Right. Pretty basic, but pretty nifty, right? So just to know how to do that. Very commonly used tags. Now, here's another comment on these. Some of these things, the bold, the italics, you can actually accomplish these in a bunch of different ways, including with CSS. And a lot of designers will prefer to do it that way. If you know something's going to be bold, you don't want to futz with it with CSS, you can just put a bold tag or a I tag around it, and you got bold and italics right there. Not too bad. All right, moving on. So we covered already 4 of these, believe it or not. Then they have some other really kind of goofy ones. For example, this is actually a sample of all the different phrase elements, by the way. This is not a complete list, just some that you might consider using. One that's kind of interesting and kind of newish to HTML5 is this mark tag, which creates like a yellow highlight. Kind of weird, but it might be useful. All right. So the guys that do this TV show are originally from Kingsford, Michigan. So why don't we highlight that? Let's do a mark. I'm going to take the closer and move it to after Michigan. We're going to save that back over to the browser. And so you're going to see this text here, highlight yellow. Here's the refresh. I think that's particularly ugly, but there's the demonstration, right? I'm not sure I'd ever do this on a web page unless I was simulating like an academic highlighting or something. You know what I mean? Questions I get sometimes on this one is, can you change the color? Yes, you can. Actually, so you can make it pink, you can make it green, right? Yellow is the default. All right. Next one we're going to try is small. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting one. So if I'm, okay, so here's a good thing to maybe make small. So I have like this citation here at the end of my block quote, and I'm indicating what my source is. And and if I was really good about it, I'd put a URL in here. You know what? I guess it's right here. I could do that. So I can just click in here, copy, and instead of saying Wikipedia, whatever, I can actually paste in the URL. Right. This will not make it a link, by the way. Right. This is just going to come up as text. So, but let's save this and take a look at it first. Right. So let's take a look at what horrendous thing we've created. All right. So here's my refresh. And so now you can see source. And it would be nice at some point to turn that into a link, and we can do that later. But you can see it's pretty big, right? It doesn't really look that great right now. But it does have the information. And really, because it's a citation, I might want to make it smaller. You know what I mean? So this is where the small tag would come in. So I'm going to put small tags around that text. Small. Take the closer and drag and drop it to the end here. And then I'm going to do a Control S to save. Back over to the browser and refresh. You see how it got a little bit smaller? This is kind of interesting. Small is one of those that I tend not to use. It's kind of like in a pinch kind of situation, real frankly. And you should ask yourself, if there's a small, is there a large? And the answer is yes. And there's also an extra small and an extra large and an extra small and an extra large. And when you do extra small and extra large and that stuff, you do X dash large and X dash small. I'm not a fan of using those, but they do work. So in a pinch, you don't know like what size you want to make it. You just say small, it'll be a little bit smaller. right? It's just a demo of how it works. All right. The next one that we're going to try, these are useful when you are doing citations. So they have subscript and superscript. And so, for example, I was looking at, let's see. Let's find a person here. All right, let's say Charles Barkhouse. And if I want to have like a little footnote on Charles Barkhouse, I might want to have a little number next to his name. So I would put in, for example, a super, S-U-P, and then in between that, I'll just put, I don't know, pick a number like 2 or something like that. I'm going to save it and then watch his name over here in the browser, wherever he is, right here. There's the refresh. And notice that now there's a 2 and it's raised up. It's like an exponent or whatever, but it's not a footnote. It's a superscript is what they call that technically. You can also put in what we call a subscript. So I can, I'll do a 1, 2, 3 here. Let's save that, come back to the browser and refresh. And there's the subscript. So that's like a little below the text. The super is a little above the text. Right. Now you might not see a lot of functionality for that, but if you ever read academic work, a lot of times when there's a footnote, they put in one of these or one of these, and then it references something at the bottom of the page, and then you go read it to see what they're talking about. And usually it's like, hey, this is where this information came from, or this is what it means. That's typically how you use those. It can also be handy if you're doing mathematical formulas and stuff, or squares or subnumbers or whatever, which I'm sure everybody would love to do, right? All right. We're going to keep moving forward here. And the next topic that we're going to cover is this concept of nesting, right? So this is really an important concept. And we kind of have been doing it all along, but there's a possibility that the more you're doing this, that the more apt you are to make a mistake with it, right? So here's kind of the general concept of nesting. I'm doing a paragraph, and the paragraph has a bunch of information in it. So all the stuff that's inside the paragraph should go inside the paragraph tags, right? So in other words, the paragraph text is encapsulated in the opening and closing paragraph tags, right? But if I want to make everything inside that paragraph italics, and I start the italic here, I want to make sure I close it in the same relative spot. Here, it's starting inside the paragraph. So if I'm closing it, I'm going to close it inside the paragraph. And then I decide, okay, hey, there's a phone number in there. I want to make that bold as well as italics. And so I turn on my strong tag. The phone number becomes bold, but then when I close it, it started inside the italics tag and it's got to end inside the italics tag. If, for example, I took the italics tag and it was here, it's not that it wouldn't work, but the more and more complex your page gets and your tags aren't properly nested, stuff starts to break. When you start throwing CSS on there and your tags aren't properly nested, or you're throwing JavaScript on there to make it do stuff, man, you don't know what the results are going to be. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's horrific, So like the nesting and the structure of your HTML is one of the first places you look when you start having problems, right? But this is something that comes with practice. If you don't properly nest it and you're using a tool like Visual Studio Code, it will highlight in red and go, hey, you're not doing it right, and then you might be looking for why. Okay, but that's kind of the concept. All right. I think this is a good spot to take another break. We're going to take a break and then we'll come back and we'll do lists. I'm not sure how much more we're going to do here tonight, folks. Real frankly, I know it's kind of feeling like it's dragging a little bit, but we're going to press forward a ways, because if you look at the slideshow here, we got 44 slides. We're on slide 18. That's why this takes 2 weeks, right? We're going to try to get a little bit further, maybe about halfway, and then we're going to call it a night. Okay, so let's take a break. I'll see you guys in 5 minutes. All right, we're back from break and we're going to move on to our next category of tags. called lists. And HTML basically supports 3 different types of lists, and they're used for various different purposes. The first one in particular is used pretty heavily in HTML, and the other 2 maybe not quite as much, but I would say the listing order here is about the preference of or the propensity of how much they're used. So unordered lists you see a lot, ordered lists a bit less, description lists even less, but they're all pretty useful for various reasons, and we are going to play with all of them. All right, so we're actually I should move on to the next slide here. So the first one that we're going to look at is the unordered list, and basically what the unordered list creates is something that looks like this. It creates a bullet list, right? And you've probably seen this on the internet. This is pretty handy. It's like, hey, go to the grocery store and buy milk, eggs, bread, butter, whatever, right? And bullet points work well for lists. And there's 2 tags that we use to build this. The one is the UL tag, which means unordered, and unordered basically means there's no numbers or letters. It's a bullet point, right? When we get to the ordered one, it does numbers or letters if you tweak it right. But generally, that's the major difference. Now, in terms of the structure, we use 2 tags, the UL, which defines the whole list, and then the LI, which does each individual tag inside of it. So, for example, here's an example of an unordered list. Now, I don't know if I can grab this as text so I don't have to retype it, but yeah, kind of excellent. And you know what? I'm going to do you guys the solid and save you guys a little bit of typing in the chat, folks. This is me feeling kind, basically. So you don't have to type in this code. You can just copy paste it right into Visual Studio. So I'm going to go back over there, and I'm just going to put this at the bottom, right? And the stuff that's in the list, real frankly, is not relevant to what my theme is. But I think I noticed on that web page, the Wikipedia page, that is, and this is me being goofy. Well, notice they have a list of their cast members. Notice the bullet point. And then I think they have a list of notable discoveries, right? All right, so I'm just going to all right, let's do this. I'm going to just go in here and say, Spanish copper coin. You don't have to change yours. I'm just doing mine. Roman sword. What else? Metal hinge. I'm just like trying to grab a couple of items here. And ox shoes. That's a pretty weird one. All right, so that's my list. Okay, so I'm going to save this now, and then I'm going to come back to the browser and do a refresh. And this is going to be at the very bottom of the page, by the way. So here's the refresh. Scroll down, and there's my list. All right. Key takeaways here on this one are the entire list is encapsulated by the opening and closing UL tags. And then each list item has its own opening and closing tags. I want you to notice also that list items indent, right? Even the bullets are indented. And I mean, it's a pretty basic structure, and it's a nice way. Like if you have a list of things and you want to point them out and make them significant, it's not a bad way to do it, right? I mean, you notice it. Now, if I take this same code, I'm going to copy it. Rio, you trying to ask a question?
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, not a problem. I didn't know if you were asking or if you just accidentally hit the button or whatever. But I'm going to change this UL to an OL. This is pretty quick and easy to do. And that's going to change it from being a bulleted list to, check it out. Oops, and that's not where I want to refresh. I want to refresh here. Did I save? So saving and refreshing. And now same list, but with numbers in front of it. Okay, so like I mentioned before with these two, using CSS, by the way, you can change the bullet. You can make it different shapes. You can even use images and colors and weird symbols and stuff, like emojis, for example. And with the numbers, you can change it to Roman numerals. You can change it to upper or lowercase letters. And basically the reason for that is you can basically simulate an outline using the ordered list. I'm not a huge fan of doing that, but it is doable. Right, so that's unordered list and ordered list. The other list structure, so here's ordered. We talked about this one, just did that. The other one is what we call a description list. And this one, unlike the previous two, doesn't have 2 tags, it has 3. The thinking on the description list is basically, and I'm just going to clarify this too. I hear people calling this description list and other people calling it definition list. And I think either one is really correct. But basically, the entire list is contained within those tags. And then to break it down inside those tags, we have the thing that we're trying to define, the IP, for example, meaning Internet Protocol. So definition term, DT, and then definition data, which is the actual description. And when you put it on the screen, it kind of looks like this. I'm just going to copy this one verbatim from here. And if you guys don't have that PowerPoint open, here it is in the chat. Wow, it actually bolded. That's kind of weird. And now I'm just going to drop that into my code here as it is. All right. Here's kind of another interesting little trick for you guys, and I'm showing this to you kind of early in the class. But you notice, like, so far all of my indenting and stuff is like pretty on point. It's pretty clean and well organized. And then I got to this one, and this one's not quite straight and stuff. You can actually highlight your code in Visual Studio Code, do a right click and format your code. So watch, it cleans it up for me. And I don't know if you guys picked it up, but if you highlight everything in the document and right click, you can format the whole document. So if you're sloppy code typer and then you want it to make it all look neat and organized, you can just do that trick and it'll take an ugly looking block of code and make it look beautiful. You know what? And why not, right? I mean, it's automatic, it's there, let's use it. You know, that's kind of my philosophy on it. Right, so let's take a look at what the definition list looks like. Now, one thing I don't like about it is normally I would indent these. That's what I would do with it, because that's how it ends up on the page. So it's easier for me to remember. So let's go back and look at it in the browser. Here's the refresh down to the bottom. And there's the definition list with a definition term and a definition data. You guys all good? Fantastic. All right, let me take a look at the slideshow here and see where we're sitting at, and then I'm going to make a judgment call here. You know what? I think this is actually a good spot to stop right now. We do have another half hour left in class, so I could press forward, but there's no way we're making it through all the slides. So what I want to do here is I want to basically reserve some of this content for next time. So we'll finish up this content, and then we'll publish it up to Prometheus. And now, if you look at the calendar too, today is the 12th. This stuff isn't due until the 21st. We got plenty of time. So we have 2 days following next day's class to get this stuff turned in. If you guys feel ambitious and you want to try to finish this on your own, and I'm just putting it out there in the video, you can look at my older videos where I do this. I won't be doing Curse of Oak Island, though. I'll be doing like Green Bay Packers or House of the Dragon or something weird like that. Right. But you guys are welcome to press forward. I'm feeling tired. I think I'm feeling like the vibe from you guys is kind of like mellowing. And so let's call it a night. How do you guys feel about that? You're good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Well, I'm going to end this video here. People watching the video, don't forget to subscribe. More will be coming.